At my son's wedding, the officiant said, "If anyone objects, speak now." So I stood up and pressed play. Before I show you what was on that screen, tell me your city in the comments, and write stay if you're the kind who watches all the way to the truth. It started the morning of the wedding. A fairy horn outside. Coffee I couldn't taste. My son looked at me and said, "Mom, don't open the living room door." I asked, "What's in that room?" He said, "Dad and the bride." He handed me his phone. A hotel garage. My husband's hand on her back. Then more. Hall camera, lobby camera, the back door. There's a kind of closeness you can't stage. A private investigator mapped the rest. Loans against my 401k with my name forged. Cash pulled just under the limit. Wires sent to the bride's company labeled consulting. On paper, it looked tidy. On audit, it screamed. And then, the boy. 13 years old, a cheek swab, 99.997% match. My husband's son. His name is Noah. That changed what I'd do next. I didn't want drama. I wanted clean. So I brought the truth to the only place where lies would choke. The greenhouse under cafe lights in front of everyone who mattered. Stay. You're about to see the videos, the numbers, the detective who walked in, and the moment a wedding became a reckoning. He came around the table and put his phone down in front of me. "I hired someone," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "A lawyer?" I asked. "A private investigator," he said. "A friend of mine knows a woman, Joelle Ortiz. She used to work financial crimes for the postal inspectors. Now she runs her own shop. She's thorough." I tapped the phone awake. The first photo was a grainy shot from a security camera in the underground garage of a waterfront hotel in Seattle, time-stamped. My husband's hand on Riley's lower back, the angle of her head tipped toward him in a way that is a language of its own. The second photo made the first photo unarguable. There's a kind of closeness you can't stage without a body remembering what it wants. I put my hand on the counter to keep the room from shifting. "How long have you known?" I asked. He rubbed his forehead like there was a calculation up there he kept getting wrong. "A month." I didn't want to believe it. I kept giving them everything you raised me to give people. Time. Benefit of the doubt. Proper context. Then I saw them at a cafe in Belltown in a booth with one menu between them and exactly one space between their shoulders. His mouth pulled tight. I thought I was crazy. I told myself lines don't mean anything if you only see them from the right angle. But the line kept being there, no matter where I stood. My chest ached with a complicated pride. Even bruised, he wanted to be fair. And now I know what I know, he said, but it's not just that. Joelle found money stuff. And something else. Money. I tasted metal. What kind? Loans against your 401k, he said. Spousal consent signed by you. Regular cash withdrawals just under thresholds. And wires to an LLC Riley manages, disguised as consulting fees. He made a sound that could have turned into a laugh if it weren't caught in barbed wire. The nonprofit queen with a side hustle that looks like a laundromat. It is possible to be furious and steady at the same time. I reached for the mug I hadn't sipped and set it down again. "And the other thing," I said when he couldn't. He blew out a breath. "Joelle thinks Dad has a son, 13, lives in University Place." Everything in me stilled. The refrigerator hummed like an unhelpful witness. "Does the boy know?" I asked. "I don't know," he said. "Joelle didn't knock on doors." She said that wasn't her call. I nodded. "It's ours," I said. Because whatever else this day would be, it would not be a day we let ourselves be people who turned away from a child to make our grief more tidy. At 9:05, Joelle arrived. She was maybe 38, with the kind of presence that makes you straighten your spine without deciding to. Sensible raincoat, thick braid, a tote bag that probably cost less than one of Riley's handbags and would outlast 3 of them combined. She sat at my dining table with her back to a wall, Cop habits die slowly, and laid out a folder like a nurse arranging instruments. "Naomi," she said, "thank you for trusting me to be blunt. I'm going to be exact. If you need me to stop, say so, and I'll stop." She was exact. The hotel logs, the garage camera, the bar receipt where a room number had been scrawled and then scratched out, the cash withdrawals, $700 here, $600 there, scattered across branches like birdseed, 3 loans against my retirement account with spousal consents that wore my name and a stranger's hand. I looked at the signatures and felt cold and oddly clinical, as if I were a third person in the room watching the first 2. "How much?" I asked. $58,900, Joelle said, plus about $22 in cash draws over 5 months, plus wires to a Nevada LLC registered by a trust. The trust is managed by Ms. Whitaker. The room rang without sound. I nodded, and she went on. "Riley's nonprofit has red flags that aren't just sticky note level," she said. "Coded reimbursements for travel that didn't happen. A shell vendor that delivered 2 trainings to sites that say they've never heard of her. Grant funds that detour through her LLC for 48 hours and land in legitimate expenses after being skimmed. On paper, it looks tidy. On audit, it yells, 'How real is your evidence?' I asked. 'If I put it up in public, will it hold?' 'It's real enough I flagged it to a detective I trust,' she said. 'You can press play and the process will catch up. On the rest, my advice is to show, not tell. People believe their eyes before they believe your words. And the boy,' I said. 'Tell me his name.' 'Noah,' she said, and the syllables hit the table between us like something fragile we needed to hold with both hands. 13. Mother is Tanya Ruiz. She worked accounts payable at your husband's company for 6 months 14 years ago. Left after a transfer to Portland fell through. There are monthly payments from a personal account in your husband's name that would make sense if you were an honorable man supporting a child he doesn't claim. There's also a cheek swab Graham left on a toothbrush I borrowed when he smiled at me and said, 'By all means, use the nice bathroom if you need it.' You'd be surprised how often vanity poses as kindness. The lab came back at 99.997 probability. I didn't reach for tissues. I didn't make a movie of it. Instead, I took the fact of the boy into my chest and set it alongside the fact of my son, and I let my heart grow the extra room. It hurt. Growing always does. "What do we do?" I asked. "Now." "We do the next right thing," Joelle said, "which is whatever you'll be able to live with in a year when the adrenaline is gone and the story is dried. If you want to confront them in private, we can do that. If you want to press play at the wedding, we can do that. If you want to walk away and handle it quietly with lawyers on Monday, we can do that. But you should know, Graham is practiced. He will be so reasonable your own memory will try to adjust itself to fit his version. If you want clean, you may need an audience." There is a line in me that has always belonged to the girl I used to be, the one who turned in her homework early, who practiced the piano until the house hummed with scales, who carried other people's coats without ever asking them to carry hers. That line stood up. "I want clean," I said. We ferried to the island in separate cars. I sat in the passenger seat with Mara, my younger sister by 4 years, driving. She has a way of gripping a steering wheel like she's doing the whole world a favor. She kept her eyes on the road and did exactly what I needed her to do. She asked me questions about candles and seating charts and whether Evan's Aunt Jess would be offended by being near the heater. She didn't ask if I was okay. When we parked, she put a hand on my leg, squeezed, and said, "Whatever it is, you can do it." Then she popped the trunk and made a show of wrestling an absurdly light box, so I had to help her and move my body like it was useful. The greenhouse looked like a ship of glass run aground in a field of gold grass. Inside it smelled like damp earth and eucalyptus. The florist, B, a quiet artist with sleeves of ferns tattooed on her arms, was wiring dahlias into place under a canopy she'd built from branches that still looked alive. The light came through the panes like it had been practicing all week. I set my clutch on the chair with a small card that read, "Mother of the Groom." Inside the bag, a flash drive, a folded letter I wasn't sure I would use, the pen that lived in the good notebook, a pack of tissues, a granola bar, a smooth river rock I kept in my pocket on hard days, because texture helps when thought spirals start tightening. The projector had already been tested for the slideshow of Evan's childhood I'd spent a week making. We weren't going to use it. Joelle slipped in wearing black and the air of staff. She helped a caterer adjust a table leg and nodded to the sound tech like she belonged, because she did. At 11:37, my phone buzzed with a text. "Here. Unmarked. Wait for your cue. Detective Ariana Knox." I didn't know I'd been holding my breath until I read it and remembered how to fill my lungs from the bottom. Graham arrived at 11:50, immaculate, smelling faintly of cedar and money. He kissed my cheek like we were still doing that and whispered, "Perfect day, Nay." I used to like when he called me that. It came from our second date when he told me he liked good names with clean lines, and I said, "Naomi has lines you can fold into a paper crane." He had laughed like a tiny bell. I looked at him and saw a man who had practiced charming for so long he didn't know how not to do it. Riley arrived at noon, hair in a low twist, dressed like a cloud. She hugged me and held my shoulders and said, "I love you." And I watched the sentence slide off me because love doesn't skate like that. Love lands and puts its weight down. Guests took their seats. The greenhouse hummed with small, polite joy. The quartet began the song I had chosen because Evan liked the movie it was from when he was 14, the one with the soundtrack that made him decide instruments could tell a story better than words sometimes. On a normal day, that would have made me cry. On this day, it made my hand find the smooth river rock. The officiant was a retired English teacher with a voice like a good book. She welcomed us into something ancient and ordinary. Evan took his place. Riley walked the aisle. My son took her hands. He looked like a man who would hold a bridge steady for strangers in a storm. The vows were modern and brief. Love as a daily verb. Faithfulness as a choice you repeat. Partnership as a thing you build and maintain and rebuild. For a second, in the wash of music and faces and light, I could almost believe the last 6 weeks had been a fever dream I would laugh about someday. Then the officiant said the sentence I had built my day around, "If anyone knows a reason these two should not be married, speak now or forever. Hold your peace." The greenhouse inhaled and did not exhale. People glanced around in that small mammal way we all have when the air shifts. I stood. The noise that followed wasn't a gasp so much as a pressure change. Graham's fingers clamped around my wrist. "Naomi," he said through his teeth, not looking at me. "Sit." Down, I lifted his hand off my skin and placed it on his knee like a delicate object I was done borrowing. I didn't look at him. I looked at my son. "I'm sorry," I said to the room. I wish 1,000 other things were true. But I have a reason I walked to the small table with the laptop and pressed a key. The first slide was Evan at 3 in a cardboard box he had insisted was a boat. People laughed in relief because they liked the story they were already telling more than the story that's coming. Then the second slide appeared, and relief left the room like water through a drain. On the screen, Graham and Riley in the underground garage, time-stamped. Then a hall camera at the hotel. Then a still from a lobby camera. Then the back entrance with a hand on a hip I had held 1,000 times and would now never hold again. You think you'll faint in a moment like that. You don't. You become a spine. "This isn't Photoshop," I said. "This is the truth we did not ask to hold." Graham surged to his feet. "Naomi's not well," he said to the crowd, the way a man who has practiced his whole life speaks when he is suddenly out of lines. "We've all been under stress. Let's sit," I said, not loud, and he did. There are tones mothers learn that have nothing to do with volume. The slides changed. Bank statements. The neat little withdrawals just under reporting thresholds. Smart enough to dodge an algorithm, not smart enough to dodge a woman's eyes. The loan documents with that ghost of my hand at the bottom. A wire memo with consulting spelled correctly, but nothing about it aligned. The spreadsheet Joelle had made that turned money into a map. Grant in, pause in a pass-through LLC, skim, then back into legitimate expenses with a note that would look fine unless you knew what fine actually looked like. People stopped looking at me and started looking at Riley. Hope doesn't die in a dramatic flare. It goes out like a candle you didn't know had just run out of wick. "This is fraud," I said. "That part is for detectives and attorneys." But there is one more truth we need in this room. The last image was a photo of a boy with dark hair and a smile that hurt to look at because I recognized it from my own mirror. Beneath it, a single line, probability of paternity, 99.997%. "Evan," I said to my son, though the room heard me, "your father has another child. His name is Noah, and he deserved better than this." Silence is a creature with weight. It lay down at the feet of Riley's mother, who had just realized that the expression on her husband's face was not shock, but shame. It stretched out beside a row of bridesmaids too young to have old eyes, but who suddenly did. It put its head in my lap and waited for me to decide if I was going to stroke it or push it away. I stood still. I did not pet it. I did not move. Graham ran. He didn't do the graceful exit he was famous for, the Irish goodbye at the end of a party, the smooth slide out of a conversation just before a request landed. He knocked into a chair and apologized out of habit and bolted through the side door into the bright noon, like a man who suddenly remembered his legs were functional. I didn't follow. I didn't have to. Detective Knox stepped in from the same side door and spoke to Riley in a voice that sounded like a person reminding you of the rules you agreed to before the game started. "Ms. Whitaker," she said, "I have some questions about the grant funds your organization administered this quarter." She didn't put hands on anyone. She didn't need to. Her presence told the story. The part after the part you watch. Guests watched us like you watch a storm on the horizon and realize, belatedly and with terrible clarity, that you are standing in a field. The officiant closed her book. Evan did not move. Riley reached for him and stopped when he didn't take her hand, and for the first time since I met her, I saw a girl under the woman, a girl who had been told she was exceptional. So often she had believed it meant she would not be subject to gravity. I looked at my son and said, "I'm so sorry," because there are words mothers say even when the thing they are apologizing for is the universe. He shook his head once. "Thank you," he said back. We undid the thing we had been doing. People stood and then sat and then stood again and drifted toward the doors in little groups, whispering as if the greenhouse would scold them for speaking too loud. The quartet put boughs in cases and walked out sideways like respectful thieves. My sister found me, wrapped both arms around me, and I let my forehead rest on her shoulder like we were children at the county fair, and I needed to step out of the spinning tunnel to find the ground again. There is a list you accomplish after you blow up a life. You give a statement. You answer Detective Knox's questions about documents you didn't know you had memorized until you're asked to recite them. You tell the caterer you will take what can be donated and pay the rest, and you feel unreasonably grateful when she says, "We can make almost all of this go to the shelter and the women's housing program," and you nod so hard your neck aches and you whisper "thank you," like she just saved your family from a flood. You hug 3 people you barely know because they are the ones in front of you, and you are a human who needs to put her hands on something that isn't a lie. That night, I went home to a house that had become an index of itself. Door, hallway, room, table, chair, labels for objects whose meanings had shifted. Mara stayed on my couch. I lay in bed with the window cracked so I could hear the fairy horns and felt the particular quiet of an island day settling in my bones from the inside. I slept 3 hours and woke to a phone that had already learned how to imitate a fire alarm. messages from numbers I didn't save, news alerts with my family blurred in the background of a photograph that belonged to someone else. I turned the phone screen down and made coffee I didn't drink and folded towels like folding fabric could keep me from falling apart. 2 days later, I walked into a lawyer's office with a flash drive and a folder and a ring I took off without drama and placed on the table like a coin you hand a boatman. I didn't want vengeance. I wanted restitution and something that felt like a floor. My lawyer used words like forged, misappropriated, breach. I nodded until my neck hurt and signed my name in a hand that was mine. Joelle talked to people who liked talking to Joelle, and soon enough, Graham's job decided that a CFO whose signature could not be trusted on paper should not be trusted in a chair either. He moved to an apartment near 6th Avenue on the other side of town and texted me a sentence that read, "I don't know who I am." I typed 3 answers. The person who chose this, the person who can choose something else, and not my problem. I deleted all 3 and put the phone face down. Riley did not go to jail that week or the next. Real life is not a movie. Detective Knox asked questions while Riley's attorney asked for patience, and her parents asked for discretion, and her board asked for her resignation. The spreadsheet did what spreadsheets do when they are made by a woman who believes in math and consequences. The charges came, not with fanfare, but with the quiet machinery of a system that still sometimes works. Riley took a deal that included restitution, a felony on a record she couldn't charm away, and a period of supervised transition people who like euphemisms call time. Her mother sent me a letter that said, "We did not raise her for this," and I sent one back that said, "None of us did." Evan moved through that first month like a man wading through a river with a current he refused to pretend wasn't there. He went to therapy. He came home and showed me the worksheets about boundaries he hated and the breathing techniques he also hated but admitted sometimes helped. He took the arch he had built for a wedding and sanded it lightly and repurposed it as a trellis in our backyard, trained a clematis to lace itself up the posts, and told me, "It's going to look different than I pictured, but it'll be a living thing, and that matters." Then there was Noah. 2 weeks after the wedding that wasn't, an envelope arrived addressed in careful printing. The return address said T. Ruiz. Inside, a letter. Not an apology, not a confession, a simple, fierce paragraph. "Naomi, my son is 13. His name is Noah. He saw the news. He has questions. I do too. I will not put him in the middle of a fight that isn't his. If you want to meet in a place where no one has to whisper, he and I go to Sweet Molly's on Bridgeport Way on Saturdays around 3 for scones we can't afford. If you sit near the window, we will sit near the counter. If it's too soon, I will understand. If you write back, I will answer. Tanya." I read it twice and put my hand over the words and felt the heat of the paper under my palm. I showed it to Evan. He read it and didn't hesitate. "Mom," he said, "I want to meet my brother." We went to Sweet Molly's on a Saturday. It rained like the sky forgot to swallow. It's one of those bakeries that puts the cookie sheets in the window so you believe in butter again. The glass fogged on the left side by the espresso machine. I sat facing the door with my hands wrapped around a mug I didn't lift. Evan sat to my right because that is where he has sat since he was little. At 3:07, the bell tinkled. A woman in a navy raincoat stepped in, shook out her umbrella, and looked for the window. Tanya is a kind of beautiful that doesn't announce itself the first 10 minutes. She has eyes that hold you until you stop pretending. She wore no ring. Her hair was braided in a way that said, "I don't have time for this and I will look good anyway." The boy with her stood half a step behind, like he had been taught to let the room introduce itself first. "Noah," Evan said, standing up like good men stand up, not to be old-fashioned but to use their bodies as the tools they are. "I'm Evan." Noah nodded, the tiniest chin tilt that said, "I am a boy being asked to be brave." "Hi, Evan," he said. Then he looked at me. "Are you Naomi?" "I am," I said, "and I'm nervous." I said it because if adults want children to speak plainly, we should go first. He smiled, a quick flash that gave him away. He had Graham's dimples and my eyes, and his own entire self layered on top. He nodded at the case and said, "Do you like lemon anything?" "I do," I said. He said, "Good," like he could work with that. Tanya ordered. We sat. For the first 15 minutes, we didn't say the word father. We said scone and school and soccer. Noah pulled a sketchbook from his backpack and showed us a series of bridges he'd drawn, each labeled in block letters with the kind of care you give a name you want to get right. Truss, arch, cable stayed, beam, suspension. He'd written the word Tacoma Narrows and drawn 2 versions, the one that fell and the one that didn't, arrows pointing to why. He spoke about oscillation like it was a friend who had made a bad choice and was trying to do better. "You like knowing what holds," I said. He looked at me like I had just said a thing he'd been pretending no one could see. "Yeah," he said. He glanced at Tanya and she nodded and he went on. "I like when you can show your work and there's less arguing about it." Tanya looked at me and her eyes softened somewhere behind her face. "He's good with facts, less good with people's interpretations of them. My kid is the opposite," I said. "He can sit in a room full of interpretations and find the one that fits. Together, maybe you're a whole." We did not touch the word father that day. We did not take a photo. We didn't try to build a quick story out of complicated wood. We said, "See you next Saturday," and meant it. At school, spring turned the seniors feral. The hallways smelled like wet denim and ambition. I met with a girl who was failing English because she'd taken on too much, and a boy who was going to drop band because his friends stopped showing up, and the only way to make the ache stop was to stop beating his own heart in time. I swallowed other people's small storms and spit them back out as plans. Then, at 3:10 on Saturdays, I walked into a bakery and learned how to be a person again around a boy who drew bridges and a woman whose dignity sat in the chair next to her and breathed with its mouth closed. Evan went back to his apartment after a month of sleeping at my house, while I walked the first weeks like a newborn deer. He took the trellis with him and a cutting from the clematis and hung a hammock on his small balcony, and when I looked at him, I saw a man who had gone through something hot and was cooling into his new shape. He got a job with a firm that designs stormwater systems for neighborhoods that flood every winter, and he called me from a site visit his second week to say, "Mom, it's weirdly satisfying to tell water where to go and have it listen." Riley pleaded guilty to 1 count in exchange for dropping 3 others. She stood in a courtroom with the same posture she'd worn to galas and suddenly looked like a girl in borrowed shoes. She paid back what she could. She took a job she didn't brag about in a place that doesn't care what you used to be. I didn't celebrate her fall. I don't have room in my body for delight at other people's wreckage. But I slept better knowing that the math checked out. Graham sent a letter in an envelope addressed by hand. The paper was thick. He had always liked nice paper. He wrote that he was in therapy and didn't recognize the man who had taken so much from so many that he had always been able to justify each individual compromise until they added up to a person, that he was sorry, that he did not expect me to forgive him. He hoped someday our conversations would not be courtroom statements. He wrote that he had seen Noah from a distance at a park and had not approached because he no longer trusted himself to make a choice that centered anyone's needs but his own. He asked me to believe he was trying. He did not ask me to invite him home. He did not ask for Evan's phone number. He did not ask for mine. He signed it with his full name, like a man signing a confession. I read it twice and put it in a drawer and let a week sit on it like a paperweight. Then I wrote back, "Graham, I believe you're trying. Trying and doing are not the same thing. You chose 1,000 single steps that led to here, and that matters. What you do next matters more. I am not the judge of your soul. I am the steward of mine and Evan's peace. We are not coming back to the life you built out of lies, because the foundation is ash. I forgive you because I won't carry you around any longer. Forgiveness is not a key to our old door. It's a key to a gate in a garden I plan to sit in by myself and breathe. Naomi. He texted a single line, "Thank you for not making me your job." I wrote back, "You were never my job. That was part of the problem." Summer cracked open in the Pacific Northwest, the way it does when it decides it will. Suddenly, with the lake smelling like sunscreen and daylight, lingering like a guest who won't take a hint. On Tuesdays, I sat at a picnic table at Point Defiance with Mara, ate fish tacos, and let the gulls make fools of themselves. On Thursdays, Evan brought Noah to our backyard, and the two of them watched a Mariners game with the kind of seriousness only baseball and grief can teach a person. Tanya came sometimes and brought a salad and a story about a customer at the bank who wanted to cash a check older than the teller who refused him. She laughed without asking permission. When we washed dishes, she said, "Do you ever feel like you're learning a new alphabet?" I keep reaching for letters that aren't there anymore. I said, "Yes," and handed her a towel. In August, Noah asked if he could see the trellis Evan had built from the arch. We stood in the small back garden of Evan's apartment while the clematis worked quietly and green at the edges, determined to root. Noah touched the wood and asked about fasteners and load and why the joints were cut the way they were, and Evan showed him the pencil marks he hadn't sanded off yet on purpose so he could remember where he'd measured twice. Noah nodded solemnly. "I like when something that was for one thing can be for another," he said. "Like bridges that become parks after nobody needs the bridge for cars anymore." "Me too," I said. "It feels like the world saying it's not done being useful just because it can't be what it used to be." In September, the school year shouldered itself onto my calendar and sat down. I wrote SAT and FAFSA opens in block letters on the whiteboard outside my office and spent 3 days convincing a linebacker that asking for help is not the same as losing and coaxing a girl who wanted to drop AP Calc to look another week down the road before she ripped the calendar page. I was good at my job again. It felt like being stitched back together. I sold the house in late fall. I expected to sob in each room like a montage. I did not. I walked through with a notebook and wrote down everything I had once loved about the place and thanked the drywall and the sills and the creaky stair and the dent in the baseboard on the third step left by a robot vacuum that hated corners. Then I left a letter in the kitchen drawer for the new family that said, "This house is very good at holding people while they try things. If the hallway ever feels like it's shrinking, open a window and put a pot of onions on the stove, and it will remember what it's for." I moved to a smaller townhome with light that did not care who I used to be. I bought a couch I hadn't had to negotiate with anyone about. I hung 3 photographs: Evan as a boy with cake on his face, a fairy slicing the sound at dusk, and a picture of nothing in particular. Just sunlight on my kitchen counter making a rectangle I could never quite catch at the same time of day. I slept well in a room that was mine. On a Saturday in November, Noah and I made lemon bars together. He zested like a pro and cut the butter in with a pastry cutter like he was mapping a delta. Flour drifted onto the counter. He wiped it into a perfect line with the side of his hand and then wiped the line away. "You like order," I said. "I like when things do what I expect," he said. "And if they don't?" He shrugged a little. "I try again. Or I tell myself I was wrong about what to expect." I nodded. "That sounds like engineering," I said, "and being a person." He set the pan down and looked at me in that direct way of his that feels like being measured for something that will actually fit. "Am I your family?" he asked. The question came like a small, careful truck that still knocked the air out of me. I didn't make him wait long. "Yes," I said, "you are my family." He nodded once. "Okay," he said, as if he had decided to accept the offer on our behalf. I did not speak to Graham again until early winter, when he asked if we could meet for coffee in a shop that had too many plants and counted tipping as moral philosophy. I picked a weekday at 7 a.m., so if it went badly, I could walk into first period and let other people's needs rinse mine out. He looked older in the way men do when they stop being lit by their own self-regard. He held his cup like it might jump. "I'm sorry," he said quickly, like he'd practiced the speed and the sentence in the mirror. Not in the cheap way, not to make you tell me I'm forgiven so I can go buy a new suit. I'm sorry as in, I am a different man in the mirror now, and there are days I hate him, and days I hope for him, and none of those days are your problem. I believed him. The part I loved had not been a lie. That complicated everything and nothing. "I forgive you," I said. "Not for you. For me. I like the way it feels to set things down." He nodded so hard his hair moved. "Evan won't see me," he said. "I don't blame him." "Give him time," I said. "Then give him more." He covered his face with his hands and cried. I did not. I have cried my share. When he was done, he pulled in a breath like someone rising from a long dive. "I'm going to write to Noah through Tanya," he said, "only if she agrees. I won't pull him across any line he's not ready to cross." "It isn't a line," I said. "It's a bridge." "And you don't get to name it." "He does." He nodded. "Right," he said. "Right." Winter in Tacoma is a lesson in gray. The sky settles in. The light comes late and leaves early and seems content with that. I bought a happy lamp and sat in front of it like a plant. I joined a grief and growth group at a community center where we ate store-brand cookies and told the truth 12 minutes at a time. There was a man whose wife had taken his dog, a woman who had buried her sister, a teacher who didn't know what to do with the quiet after a house full of kids who had all gone to college at once. We took turns not fixing each other. In February, Evan brought someone new to dinner. Her name was Liv. She is a librarian and looks at people the way people should be looked at, like you are not a problem to diagnose or a box to check, but a book she wants to read slowly because the sentences are better when you don't rush them. She and Evan laughed with their whole faces, and when they left my house that night, I did not feel the jolt of fear I had felt with Riley, that hairline crack you pretend is just the glass catching the light. I felt calm. That felt like a miracle. In March, Noah invited me to his school's STEM night. He stood in front of a poster board about resonance and explained to strangers how the Tacoma Narrows taught the world something about wind and pride and math. He looked across the gym at me after he finished and did the tiniest chin tilt, like a man who'd just glued a span and knew it would hold. Tanya and I stood side by side, and both of us clapped like we were trying to change the weather. Afterward, we sat in a row of folding chairs and ate cupcakes from a plastic container, and Noah said, "Do you think people like it when things fall? Or only when they get built again?" I said, "I think people like endings and beginnings. They get bored in the middle, but the middle is where the work is." He nodded. "I like the middle," he said, which is exactly the kind of thing a 13-year-old says when he has already been asked to be older than his age. In April, I took a class in trauma-informed counseling because I decided that if my life was going to break in front of me, I was going to hand it better tools. I sat in a room with other professionals and learned to ask better questions and fewer of them. I learned that language lives in the body, and that saying, "I feel a tightness in my chest" on a Tuesday morning can save a person 10 years. I learned to breathe in the bottom of my lungs. I learned to say to a teenager who does not want to be in my office, "You don't have to believe me today. You only have to believe me enough to stay in the room." A year after the day in the greenhouse, I stood on the ferry deck with Evan and Liv and Noah and Tanya and Mara and watched the city tilting away. The water was a hammered sheet of light. The wind took the words out of our mouths and made them its own. We docked on the island and walked to the park near the farmer's market with paper cups of coffee and a bag of cherries we ate with our fingers. We took a back path that smelled like cedar and salt and found the greenhouse again. A different wedding, different faces, same lights. The air looked the way hope looks if you give it enough time to become subtle. We stood at the edge of the field and didn't walk closer. I didn't need to load the place with meaning to respect it. We were simply people in a field looking at a building where a thing had happened that had ended 3 lives and started 5 others. That felt exact. "Mom," Evan said, Do you ever wish we'd done it a different way? Quietly? Less movie. I thought about it. I tried on the gentler versions and the messier ones, and the ones where I walked up to Riley in our kitchen that morning and said, "Leave now and never come back," and she did, and we buried it like a bone. I thought about the version where I never found out about Noah and the person he couldn't be to us because the sentence never got spoken out loud. I thought about Graham's tidy lies lined up like shoes and how easy it would have been to keep dusting them. "No," I said. "We did the clean thing. Clean isn't always gentle. I can live with that." He nodded. Liv looped her arm through his. Noah took 3 steps forward and 3 steps back like he was calibrating. Tanya looked at me and her eyes said, "Thank you," without her mouth making me do the work of responding. When we got home that night, my phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Graham. "Saw Noah at the park with you all. Did not approach. We are all better for that. Thank you for building a bridge I didn't deserve to cross." I typed, "Bridges aren't about deserving. They're about physics and desire." He sent back a single heart, which would have made me roll my eyes a year before. This time, I let it sit there on my screen like a period at the end of a long sentence. Spring came hard and green. Seniors chose colleges and jobs and ways of leaving that didn't look like leaving. The greenhouse booked out a year in advance. B, the florist, texted me a photo of a clematis blooming on a trellis near the side door, and I didn't cry until I vowed not to. Pickle, my cat, continued to ignore my boundaries and sleep where she pleased. My kitchen window baseball card square of sunlight drifted to a new spot I couldn't predict, and I decided that was the point. One afternoon in May, I sat on my townhome step with Noah while we ate popsicles that stained our tongues. He drew a curve on the concrete with the tip of his stick and said, "Do you think there's a point to forgiveness if the person doesn't change?" "Yes," I said, "because forgiveness isn't letting someone back into your house. It's letting yourself out of the room you locked yourself in to keep them out." He squinted like the sun offended him. "I think I get it." "You don't have to," I said. "Not today. Just write it on your bridge somewhere so you know it's there if you ever need to cross it." He nodded. He licked cherry off his knuckle. "Can we make lemon bars again?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "We can always make lemon bars." That summer, Evan proposed to Liv with a ring that looked like the moon in a small puddle. He didn't want a big wedding. He wanted a backyard and a handful of people and a tax-deductible donation to the Arts Center, where Liv ran an after-school comic book club. He asked Noah to stand with him. Noah said yes with a solemnity that made us all pretend not to wipe our eyes. Graham sent a letter wishing them joy and money in an envelope with their names, and a return address that was simply his name and no location. We sent him a photo. 4 hands on a picnic table, mine, Evan's, Liv's, Noah's, all with lemon bar sugar dust on the knuckles. No faces, just a record. He wrote back that he had printed it and put it where his mirror used to be. There is a version of this story that ends with justice like a gavel and redemption like a trumpet. I don't live in that version. I live in the version where justice looks like restitution, checks that clear, and a man who does not ask to be invited when a boy he loves plays at a school game. I live in the version where redemption is a slow drip. You don't notice until you realize the bucket is fuller than you left it. I live in the version where ordinary kindness counts more than grand gestures, because it is what people do on Thursdays without witnesses. If you have listened this far, thank you for being the kind of person who sits in the middle. Tell me where you're watching from. I mean it. Drop your city in the comments. If any part of this sounded like your life, you are not alone tonight. If you are standing in a hallway outside a door you're afraid to open, hear me. You are not hysterical. You are not asking for too much. You are a witness to your own life, and that is holy work. Close the door if you need to. Open it if you must. Press play if that's the only way to make the room stop lying.